Spain, from the Silver Empire to the Sun Never Sets, Afterglow. Part 1. The Rise of the Two Monarchs on the Iberian Peninsula. Welcome to Deep Sight. I am your time navigator, Lawrence Stardust. In previous episodes, we walked through Germany's thousand-year path to unification, witnessed Italy's rebirth from the ruins of the Renaissance, and dissected how the European grandmother's web of bloodlines wove the threads of World War. Today, we turn our gaze to the southwestern corner of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, home to a nation that once ruled half the globe, Europe's first superpower, Spain. The year 1492 was a magical one. That year, Granada fell, ending nearly 8 centuries of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula, and a unified Catholic kingdom, Spain, was officially born. Almost simultaneously, a Genoese sailor, backed by the Queen, sailed west and discovered a new world that Europeans had never imagined. In the same year, a scholar published Europe's first grammar of a vernacular language, Gramática de la Lengua Castellana, declaring that Spanish was capable of standing on equal footing with Latin. 3 events in a single year. If that is not destiny, what is? In the 2 centuries that followed, the Spanish Empire became the first true global empire in human history. Its territories spanned Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, from the Philippines to Mexico, from Italy to Peru. The sun never set on its dominions. King Charles I of Spain once proudly declared, "In my dominions, the sun never sets." It was the first true empire on which the sun never sets in human history. Yet this silver empire, which once ruled a quarter of the world's land, was utterly defeated in a war lasting less than 4 months in 1898 by the rising United States, losing Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. From 1492 to 1898, 400 years of rise and fall, an epic as dramatic as any. Today, we shall follow this silver road, step by step, to unpack how Spain rose to become the world's hegemon, and how it gradually declined. Station 1. The Catholic monarchs and the birth of a nation. Before Spain's unification, the Iberian Peninsula was a fragmented world. Several Christian kingdoms in the north, Castile, Aragon, Portugal, and Navarre, had faced off against the Muslim kingdom of Granada in the south for centuries. Historians generally mark 718, when the Arabs conquered the Visigothic kingdom, as the start of the Reconquista, and 1492, when Spain captured Granada, as its end. The Reconquista lasted nearly 8 centuries, the longest religious war in European history. The Christian kingdoms pushed south step by step, shrinking Muslim territory. By the mid-15th century, Muslim power had been compressed into Granada, the southernmost tip of the peninsula. For a detailed account of this history, please refer to our earlier episodes. Isabella's path to the throne, a bitter inheritance struggle. Isabella was the daughter of King John II of Castile and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal. Isabella of Portugal, 1428 to 1496, was herself a Portuguese princess, the daughter of a son of King John I of Portugal, so she carried Portuguese royal blood. She became Queen of Castile through a purely political marriage. King John II of Castile, concerned about the fertility of his only son, the future Henry IV, decided to remarry to produce new heirs. The king's favorite, Álvaro de Luna, strongly promoted the match for political reasons, seeking an alliance with Portugal. In 1447, the 19-year-old Portuguese princess Isabella married the 42-year-old King of Castile, becoming Queen of Castile. Her life as queen was far from smooth, filled with power struggles and tragedy. The king was long controlled by his favorite, de Luna, who even restricted the king from sharing her bed. Isabella eventually persuaded the king to execute de Luna in 1453. In 1451, 4 years into her marriage, she gave birth to a daughter, Isabella, the future Isabella I. In 1453, she gave birth to a son, Alfonso. When her husband John II died in 1454, her stepson Henry IV succeeded to the throne and promptly placed Isabella and her 2 children under house arrest, a confinement that lasted 20 years, until her daughter succeeded to the throne in 1474. Henry IV. Why did the impotent king have no heir? Henry IV reigned from 1454 until his death in 1474, a full 20 years. Yet he left no reliable heir. Why? Henry's nickname was the Impotent, referring not only to his inability to govern, but also hinting at possible fertility problems. This was not without basis. His first marriage was a failure. In 1440, the 15-year-old Henry married his cousin Blanche II of Navarre. The marriage lasted 13 years. But when Henry requested a divorce, it was found that Blanche was still a virgin. The Pope granted the annulment, citing witchcraft preventing conjugal relations. The king remarried in 1455, taking as his wife Joanna, the youngest sister of King Afonso V of Portugal. But the queen did not give birth to a daughter, Joanna, until 1462. This long wait cast doubt on the queen's fidelity. Joanna was rumored to have had an affair with the nobleman Beltran de la Cueva, and her daughter was contemptuously nicknamed La Beltranilla, Beltran's daughter, by her political enemies. Henry IV's rule was unpopular, and the nobles, seeking to oppose him, used the rumors of his impotence and the queen's infidelity to claim that Joanna was not his biological daughter. To counter Henry IV, the nobles in 1464 proclaimed Isabella's brother Alfonso as heir. 2 years later, they went further, proclaiming Alfonso king in open rebellion against Henry IV. Then, in 1468, the 14-year-old Alfonso suddenly died. The official cause was plague, but many suspected poison, a court tragedy. Alfonso's death left the opposition leaderless, and they turned to Isabella. After negotiations, Isabella was finally named heir by Henry IV. From today's perspective, scholars have reason to suspect that Henry IV knew very well whether Joanna was truly his own daughter. If you were king, and your queen had given birth to your own flesh and blood, would you hand the throne to a half-sister? Similarly, no man would pay for his wife's adultery. As part of the agreement, Henry IV demanded that Isabella's marriage be subject to his approval. But that scheme also eventually failed. I am the master of my fate. Isabella's marital revolution. Isabella's marriage was a union that changed history. She pioneered the freedom of royal marriage in Europe. In 1469, Isabella, heir to Castile, secretly married Ferdinand, heir to Aragon. This match was far from smooth. Henry IV had arranged a political marriage for her, to King Afonso V of Portugal. The two were distant cousins, both descendants of King John I of Portugal. Henry IV was also Afonso V's brother-in-law. Understanding this tangled web reveals the logic behind the court's intrigues. Portugal had long sought to penetrate the Spanish royal house through marriage. But the 17-year-old Isabella had a mind of her own. She was not interested in the middle-aged man and refused to be a pawn. She was drawn to Ferdinand, linked by her father's bloodline. Isabella and Ferdinand were not only political allies, but also blood relatives. They were second cousins, sharing a common ancestor in King John I of Castile. Isabella's father, John II of Castile, and Ferdinand's grandfather, John II of Aragon, were brothers, both sons of King Ferdinand of Aragon. This made Isabella and Ferdinand cousins, but with a generation gap. Isabella's father was the elder brother, Ferdinand's father was the younger, but Isabella was her father's late-born daughter, while Ferdinand was the elder brother's grandson born in old age, so Isabella was a generation above Ferdinand. Because their blood relationship posed an impediment under canon law, they obtained a special dispensation from Pope Sixtus IV to legalize the marriage. Like Henry's intended match, this marriage was also a complex political alliance. The master planner was Ferdinand's father, King John II of Aragon, who was under French pressure and badly needed Castilian support. Coincidentally, a faction of Castilian nobles discontented with Henry IV had already formed a powerful political bloc, supporting Isabella as heir. Their leader was Archbishop Alfonso Carrillo of Toledo, who naturally wished to cement their faction by marrying Isabella to Ferdinand. Thus, Aragon's king for diplomatic reasons and Castile's opposition nobles for political reasons joined forces to plan and execute this match. For this very reason, Isabella and Ferdinand's union from the start defied King Henry IV's wishes, ultimately becoming an elopement. In those days, a noble elopement was hard to get church approval for, but Isabella did not care. She wanted love, and she wanted power. The midnight elopement, a love that changed history. Their first meeting took place at midnight, October 14, 1469, in Valladolid. For Isabella, resisting her brother's marital arrangements, Ferdinand was her best path to independence and ambition. With the help of loyal nobles, she orchestrated the match. It was not a grand ceremony, but a secret rendezvous. The 17-year-old Aragonese prince, to evade the Castilian king's spies, disguised himself as a merchant and slipped into Valladolid. At that midnight hour, Isabella and Ferdinand met for the first time in the home of a Castilian noble. When the travel-stained Ferdinand entered the room, Isabella's attendant exclaimed, "It's him! It's him!" Despite his journey, Ferdinand had changed into fine clothes, showing his regard for appearance. The account of their meeting is romantic. they fell in love at first sight. The chronicler described Ferdinand as of medium height, well-proportioned, handsome, skilled in horsemanship, expert in jousting, brave, and valiant. Isabella, though he was slightly shorter than her, was charmed. Their relationship, from the start, had a solid foundation of mutual affection, and they later governed together closely. Just 5 days after that meeting, October 19, 1469, Isabella and Ferdinand were married quietly in Valladolid. This union directly paved the way for Spain's unification and launched its global hegemony. The War of Succession, Isabella's crown contest. When Henry IV died in 1474, Isabella immediately claimed the throne. This provoked opposition from King Afonso of Portugal, who supported Henry IV's daughter Joanna, sparking the War of the Castilian Succession. Afonso was both Isabella's political rival and Joanna's uncle. After Henry IV's death, Afonso, who had earlier sought to marry Isabella and coveted Castile, used this connection to marry his niece Joanna and claim the Castilian crown, igniting the war. At Henry IV's death, with no legitimate male heir, the Castilian nobles split into two camps. The Isabella faction, supported by her husband, Crown Prince Ferdinand of Aragon, and the Aragonese military. The Joanna faction, backed by King Afonso of Portugal. The civil war lasted from 1475 to 1479. Isabella's forces ultimately prevailed, and in 1479, she signed the Treaty of Alcacovas with Portugal, ending the succession dispute for good. On December 13, 1474, Isabella was crowned in Segovia. With the war won, her throne was secure. She was both the legal heir, confirmed by her brother, and a powerful queen who defended and strengthened her rule through force. Isabella's succession was not only a personal victory, its significance far exceeded a mere dynastic struggle. Her husband Ferdinand succeeded to the Aragonese throne 5 years later, in 1479, and the two crowns were united in their hands, laying the foundation for Spain's unification. Together they completed the Reconquista, unified the Iberian Peninsula, sponsored Columbus's voyage, and inaugurated Spain's age of global hegemony. In Spanish history, Isabella's place is unmatched. She was not just a legitimate heir, but a remarkable monarch who triumphed over brutal civil war and political intrigue. Her wisdom and tenacity won her not only a crown, but also cleared the way for Spain's rise. The Catholic monarchs, 3 acts that changed destiny. So what exactly did this Catholic royal couple do to change Spain's destiny? First, they completed the Reconquista. In 1482, they launched the final offensive against Granada. The war lasted 10 years. On November 25, 1491, the Granadan Sultan Muhammad XII signed the Treaty of Granada with the Catholic monarchs, a 67-article surrender promising to protect the property, religious freedom, and personal safety of Granada's inhabitants. However, these promises were gradually broken. On January 2, 1492, Granada formally surrendered, and nearly 8 centuries of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula came to an end. It is said that when Muhammad XII handed the keys of Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella, he turned to look back at the Alhambra and wept. His mother had told him, "You weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." This became one of the most famous poignant footnotes in Spanish history. Second, they sponsored Columbus's westward voyage. On August 3rd of that same year, Columbus set sail from Palos and reached the Bahamas on October 12th. Spain had opened the door to the Americas. Third, they achieved religious unification on the peninsula. The monarchs established the Inquisition, forcing Jews and Muslims to convert or flee. As early as 1478, Isabella I had ordered the establishment of many inquisitions. A pure Catholic, Spain was born in the blood and fire of brutal court struggle. Muslim-Christian integration. So, after the Reconquista, was there intermarriage and integration between Muslims and Christians? The answer is yes, but the outcome was complicated. During the long process of the Reconquista, different religious groups did mix. The Arab and Berber conquerors mostly arrived without families and intermarried with or took local indigenous women as concubines. Christian states also encouraged integration through immigration policies. However, as the Reconquista ended and nationalistic fervor swelled, the trend reversed. After Granada's fall, the Moors had to choose. Those who remained Muslim had to leave Spain. Only those who converted to Christianity could keep their property. The establishment of the Inquisition and its persecutions scattered many communities that had already merged. Spain did not become a truly pluralistic society. It became a Catholic nation purified by the stake. Spain and Portugal, why did they never unite? What about the fate of neighboring Portugal? Both countries on the Iberian Peninsula. Why did they never unify into a single nation? The reasons are complex. First, Portugal's history is older than Spain's. Spain was created by the later union of Castile and Aragon, whereas Portugal had already existed as an independent kingdom for centuries. Portugal completed its own reconquest earlier and secured papal recognition of its independence in 1143. Second, geographic and strategic factors also mattered. The north of Iberia is mountainous. Portugal occupied the relatively isolated southwestern part of the peninsula. Portugal had long turned its gaze to the sea, building its own maritime empire, a different direction from Spain's expansion. More importantly, although Spain had 80% of the peninsula's land and population, it never fully absorbed Portugal. In later history, the two kingdoms did experience a dynastic union from 1580 to 1640, when the Spanish Habsburgs ruled Portugal, but the Portuguese resisted absorption and ultimately restored their independence in 1640. Spain and Portugal were childhood sweethearts, sharing the same roots, comrades in arms shedding blood together, yet they chose different paths. Under the Catholic monarchs, Spain became a vigorous, ambitious young nation, but it was not yet the world's hegemon. What truly put Spain on the global stage was the marital web they wove. Through their children's marriages, the monarchs sent Spanish blood into the most powerful royal families of Europe. Station 2, Joanna the Mad and Charles V, from blood tragedy to global empire. Among the 5 children of the Catholic monarchs, the most remarkable was their second daughter, Joanna the Mad, Juana la Loca. Her siblings mostly predeceased her, dying young from illness, childbirth, or other misfortunes. Joanna was the second child. Her older sister, younger brother, and 2 younger sisters all met tragic ends. Elder sister Isabella, b. 1470, Queen of Portugal, died in childbirth in 1498. Elder brother John, b. 1478, Prince of Asturias, died just 6 months after his marriage in 1497, aged only 19. Younger sister Maria, b. 1482, also Queen of Portugal, died in childbirth with her 10th child in 1517. Younger sister Catherine, b. 1485, Queen of England, wife of the infamous Henry VIII, who would abandon her, died of melancholy in 1536. Joanna herself was born on November 6, 1479. She was later called the Mad for reasons that are quite complex. Most historians believe Joanna may have suffered from schizophrenia or psychotic depression. She was melancholic and moody from childhood, and her maternal grandmother had also died insane, suggesting a genetic possibility. Her strict upbringing included cruel physical punishment for religious disagreements with her mother, Isabella I. This high-pressure environment inflicted deep, lasting wounds on her young psyche. In 1496, Joanna married the handsome Habsburg Prince Philip the Handsome. This marriage became the starting point of her tragedy. Joanna loved Philip with a near-obsessive, desperate passion, but Philip was a faithless philanderer, and his betrayals made Joanna increasingly jealous and extreme. When Philip's patience ran out, he had her imprisoned in a tower, claiming she was mentally ill. In 1502, following the deaths of her brother and sister, Joanna was confirmed as heir to Castile by the Cortes of Toro. In 1504, Queen Isabella I died, and Joanna officially succeeded to the throne. But her father, Ferdinand II, declared her unfit to govern, citing her madness. Her husband Philip also conspired with his father-in-law to undermine her legitimacy with the same accusation. Yet between them, there was also great conflict. The power struggle, father-in-law versus son-in-law. The root of the conflict was the power vacuum in Castile after Isabella's death in 1504. Simply put, Ferdinand II wanted to keep ruling, while Philip I wanted to seize the throne for himself and for the wife who adored him. They fought over who would be the true master of the Iberian Peninsula. After Isabella's death, Ferdinand II lost his title as King of Castile. Isabella's will name their unstable daughter Joanna as heir, with Ferdinand as regent. On this basis, Ferdinand secured support in the Cortes and became the de facto ruler of Castile. As Joanna's husband, Philip I believed that the crown should pass to his wife, and that he, as her spouse, jure uxoris, should share in the rule. In his view, his father-in-law was merely a regent for a transitional period, and now it was his turn. He acted immediately, minting coins in the joint names of himself and Joanna, openly asserting their sovereignty. Ferdinand first claimed regency on the pretext of Joanna's pregnancy, but Philip felt cheated, and conflict escalated. Philip returned to Castile, won the support of local nobles, and quickly raised a formidable army. In November 1505, the two sides reached the Agreement of Salamanca, recognizing them as co-regents. But this did not resolve the fundamental issue. In June 1506, the Treaty of Villafafala temporarily settled the conflict. Under this treaty, Philip was recognized as King of Castile, while Ferdinand II was forced to relinquish all power and return to Aragon. The son-in-law had won. The conflict between Philip the Handsome and Ferdinand II was ultimately about the crown itself, a struggle for supremacy between the two great powers of the Iberian Peninsula, Castile and Aragon. When their union cracked after the Queen's death, rooted in ambiguous succession rules and the ambition of competing factions. Philip's sudden death, a turning point. Unfortunately, this treaty was soon meaningless, only 3 months after signing it. In September 1506, the 28-year-old Philip, after playing a game of pelota in Burgos and drinking cold water, suddenly developed a high fever and died within days. Because ice was extremely expensive to obtain and transport in the 16th century, it was a luxury available only to kings and nobles like Philip. Drinking iced water was not just a way to cool off, it was a sign of wealth and status. The royal court even appointed someone to oversee the supply of ice. Philip's iced water would have been natural ice brought down from the mountains and stored in ice houses, nevras, a rare summer luxury. His sudden death was likely caused by a sudden fatal illness, perhaps brought on by drinking the cold water. But this directly prevented the looming civil war with Ferdinand II. It also completely shattered his wife Joanna's mental state, becoming the final straw. Her reaction shocked everyone. How deeply did Joanna love Philip? She clung to his body, refusing to let anyone approach, even nuns. She believed he would rise again, and would frequently open his coffin to embrace his decaying body, and travel everywhere with the coffin. In 1509, she was imprisoned in Tordesillas by her father. When Ferdinand II died in 1516, her son Charles V inherited the throne, yet he never released her. Joanna was queen in name, but prisoner in reality, until her death in confinement on April 12, 1555, aged 75. Charles V, the dawn of the sun never sets empire. Joanna's son, Charles V, known as Charles I of Spain, inherited the Spanish throne in 1516. In 1519, he was also elected Holy Roman Emperor. He simultaneously ruled Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the Netherlands, southern Italy, and the rapidly expanding American colonies. His empire spanned 2 hemispheres, the first true empire on which the sun never sets in human history. To understand Spain's rise and fall, we must understand the deep, intertwined history of Spain and England, originally blood allies who would become mortal rivals. Station 3, Spain and England, a bond of blood and rivalry. Charles V's reign marked the zenith of Spain. He was Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. Meanwhile, England was in its Tudor glory, with King Henry VIII on the throne in London. The most direct link between them was the aunt-nephew relationship. Henry's first queen, Catherine of Aragon, was Charles V's young aunt. Though Charles was of a younger generation, he was only 9 years younger than Henry. Catherine's tragic fate. Catherine's first betrothed was Henry's elder brother, Arthur Tudor. This was a classic political alliance. Henry VII of England, seeking to ally with powerful Spain against France, arranged for his eldest son Arthur to marry Catherine, the youngest daughter of the Spanish Catholic monarchs. The betrothal was made very early. Catherine was only 3 when she was pledged to Arthur. On November 14, 1501, the 15-year-old Catherine married Arthur at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. They took up residence at Ludlow Castle in Wales. But the marriage lasted less than 5 months. On April 2, 1502, Prince Arthur suddenly died. Arthur's death made the 16-year-old Catherine a widow. For England, it was not only the loss of a prince, but also the potential collapse of the alliance with powerful Spain. Spain and France were also at odds, and Henry VII, not wanting to offend Spain, decided to keep Catherine in England and quickly betroth her to his second son, the future Henry VIII. However, according to canon law at the time, a man could not marry his brother's widow. To resolve this, both England and Spain appealed to the Pope for a dispensation. Their argument was that Catherine's marriage to Arthur had not been consummated. She was still a virgin. The Pope approved the match. In 1503, the 18-year-old Catherine was formally betrothed to 12-year-old Henry VIII. However, due to political and financial disagreements, Henry VII delayed the wedding. It was not until Henry VII's death in 1509 when the 18-year-old Henry VIII ascended the throne, that he finally married the 24-year-old Catherine. A match made in heaven. Catherine was so much older than Henry. Was this a good match? Catherine was the top tier among European princesses. As the daughter of Spain's Catholic monarchs, she was the most sought-after bride. She had noble blood, red gold hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. She was petite and curvaceous, praised as beautiful and charming, fitting perfectly with Renaissance ideals of beauty. Henry, as later portraits show, became corpulent, but in his youth he was the picture of a prince. Historical accounts say he stood over 190 centimeters tall, with long limbs, athletic, a king of both pen and sword. His presence brought youth and vigor to the English court, and he was described as the handsomest youth in the world. Despite being 6 years older, Catherine's age was not an issue. It added a certain distinctive quality to their union. Henry had first seen Catherine at age 10, she was 16, and was deeply captivated by her beauty. After marriage, they were devoted to each other. Henry openly expressed his love for Catherine, calling her the most beautiful creature in the world. Catherine was not just a wife, but a political partner. Well-educated, she served as regent while Henry was away in France, successfully defending against Scottish invasion and demonstrating remarkable political skill. Thus, this older woman-younger man couple, in appearance, status, and affection, were a perfect match. The tragedy of no son. This marriage also marked a turning point in Spain-England relations, stemming from a cruel twist of fate. They had no son. A childless marriage between loving spouses was complex. They did not lack children. Rather, they had a long and painful history of pregnancies. Catherine became pregnant 7 times. 1510, a stillborn daughter. 1511, a son, Henry's joy, who died at 52 days, a heartbreaking loss. 1513, a miscarriage. 1514, another son, who died shortly after birth. 1516, a daughter, Mary, the only survivor, the future Bloody Mary. 1518, her final pregnancy, ending in miscarriage. By the 1520s, Catherine, approaching 40, was unlikely to have more children. Henry, desperate for an heir, wanted to divorce her and find a younger queen. Charles V, due to his relationship with Catherine, was compelled to support her, becoming a major obstacle to Henry's plans. To pious Catherine, these losses seemed divine punishment. She believed her marriage to Henry was sacred. The repeated tragedies plunged her into guilt. Henry, too, began to suspect a curse. He cited the book of Leviticus. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless. He concluded that the marriage had been sinful from the start, setting the stage for the divorce that would follow. In that era without modern medicine, a male heir was paramount. Catherine's fertility was not only a personal tragedy, but also a political crisis for the Tudor dynasty, and it would profoundly affect the fates of England and Spain. Catherine was a beloved queen who paid an enormous price and endured unimaginable suffering for the sake of childbirth. But when a queen could not provide an heir, the king's patience ran out, and he sought new hope. The crisis over succession eventually led to the break between the English Church and Rome, Charles's obstruction and the English Reformation. Despite their differences, in the 1520s Charles V and Henry VIII were allied against a common enemy, France. In 1522, Charles visited England, received with great ceremony by Henry, to cement the alliance and plan joint military action against France. Between 1521 and 1526, their alliance threatened France from both sides. This was the Habsburg-Valois War. Charles also promised to marry Henry's daughter, the future Bloody Mary. The rupture came when Henry sought a divorce from Catherine. Charles's opposition, as Catherine's nephew, Charles used his political power, including the threat of force, to pressure the Pope to prevent the divorce. The English Reformation, Charles's obstruction drove Henry to break with Rome. If you won't approve, I'll just start my own church. In 1534, he established the Church of England, breaking with Rome entirely. This heightened their hostility. Though they never formally went to war, they had turned from allies into rivals. Diplomatic tug-of-war. Charles sought to draw Henry against France, but Henry no longer wanted to be Charles's junior partner. In 1544, Henry again allied with Charles against France, but this half-hearted partnership quickly fell apart. Mary I and the Spanish marriage. Mary I was Henry VIII's daughter by Catherine. When she was just 6, she was betrothed to her cousin Charles V, then 22. But this purely political engagement lasted only 3 years. Charles later broke it off. Some say Mary could not provide the large cash dowry, and he married a Portuguese princess instead. However, despite no marriage, they remained political allies for life. This is understandable. A 16-year age gap and a 6-year-old bride could hardly wait for a king. In 1553, Mary ascended the English throne. At 37, she urgently needed to marry to secure her rule and produce an heir. Charles V again appeared, proposing that she marry his son, Philip, the future Philip II. Although Charles's wife had died, he did not wish to remarry, so he offered his son. Mary agreed. In 1554, she married the Spanish prince, 11 years her junior. But this marriage, too, became a disaster for Mary. The union was deeply unpopular in England, provoking fierce opposition and even rebellion. The young Philip was equally uninterested in the nearly 40-year-old Mary. He only cared about the political advantages the marriage could bring to the Habsburgs. Mary never became pregnant, a crushing blow for a queen desperate to give England a Catholic heir. In 1558, after only 5 years on the throne, Mary died. She had no children, and the crown passed to her half-sister, the Protestant Elizabeth I, whose mother had been executed by their father. Mary's unhappy marriage and her brutal persecution of Protestants earned her the grim epithet, Bloody Mary. The end of Charles V. The relationship between Charles V and Henry VIII was not merely a reflection of Anglo-Spanish relations. It was a microcosm of 16th-century European dynastic politics. Marriages could form temporary alliances, but when national interests and personal wills collided, blood ties proved fragile. Their story also deeply shaped Europe's religious landscape and geopolitics. Charles's own end was not glorious. In 1555, at the Peace of Augsburg, he was forced to recognize the legitimacy of Lutheranism, the greatest defeat of his life. He had fought all his life against the Reformation and the Ottoman Empire, yet never truly crushed either. He also suffered from severe gout, his health worsening. His letters after his abdication reveal a profound weariness. A man who had ruled half the world and now only wanted to retire to a monastery to die in peace. Charles V had 7 children by Isabella of Portugal, but only 3 survived to adulthood: Philip, the future Philip II, Maria, and Joanna. He also had several illegitimate children, but his son Philip was a Spaniard raised in Spain, with no interest in German affairs. Charles's brother, Ferdinand, had been sent to Germany to manage Habsburg hereditary lands and knew German affairs well. As early as 1521, Charles had entrusted Austria and German matters to Ferdinand. When Charles V abdicated in 1556, he divided his vast empire. His son Philip II inherited Spain, the Netherlands, and the American colonies. His brother Ferdinand inherited Austria and the title of Holy Roman Emperor. The Habsburgs split into Spanish and Austrian branches. Charles retired to the monastery of Yuste in western Spain. On September 21, 1558, he died there, clutching a portrait of his wife Isabella, the woman he had loved most in his life, and the only marriage he made without political calculation. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Spain's rise. In the next part, we will continue with the story of Philip II's Invincible Armada, the decline of the Habsburg dynasty, the arrival of the Bourbons, Napoleon's invasion, the upheavals of the 19th century, and the eventual collapse of the Spanish Empire. Please subscribe, like, comment, and support our channel as we delve together into the deeper mists of history. By studying history, we understand the rise and fall of nations. I am Lawrence Stardust. See you next time.